Okay, I'm gonna go. And live. We're live.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the kickoff of Fishtrap Reads. We're here celebrating a great work of literature together this winter as a community. My name is Mike Midlow. I'm the program director at Fishtrap. You know, every winter since 2006, Fishtrap has hosted a community read, either through the NEA's Big Read program, or sometimes we choose a book with a strong local tie to our community. And this winter, we wanted to choose a regional book by a regional author. And this book is a classic, The Jump Off Creek by Molly Gloss. Yes, The Jump Off Creek is the unforgettable story of a homesteader, Lydia Sanderson, and her struggles to settle in the mountains of Oregon in the 1890s. The Jump Off Creek gives readers an intimate look at the hardships of frontier life and a courageous woman determined to survive. We're so happy to have Molly Gloss be a part of this. Not only is she with us tonight via live stream, but will join us 2 more times over the next month, including a visit right here to Fishtrap in Wallowa County. We can't wait. We encourage you to visit fishtrap.org and see all of the free events and resources that you can take in over the next month. Recordings will be available to view afterwards, so you can watch anytime in your classroom, with your students, at your library, in a book club, or even around the dinner table with your family. Fishtrap has provided more than 400 free books and learning resources to schools and libraries in Wallowa and Union counties here in Northeast Oregon. This is largely thanks to all of you who make a donation to Fishtrap each year, but also these fine folks who are our 2023 Fishtrap Reads sponsors. They include the Bookloft, our local bookstore, Community Bank, Oregon Arts Commission, and Pacific Power. We also have a bunch of program partners, folks who help us spread the word about the Fishtrap Reads programs. That includes Joseph Enterprise and Wallowa School Districts and Libraries, Building Healthy Families, the LeGrand School District, Arts Center East in LeGrand, Eastern Oregon University Library, the Cook Memorial Library, and the Historic Union Community Hall. Woo! That's a lot of folks. And our special thanks to the National Historic Oregon Trail Interpretive Center in Baker City, who will present 3 weeks of special programs this year over the coming month to help us all gain a deeper understanding of the life of an Oregon homesteader. I really want to say thanks to the Fishtrap board for supporting us and the staff for putting this together, and especially Fishtrap board member and Fishtrap Reads School liaison, Elizabeth Oliver, who's been with our community reads since the beginning. Learn all about it at fishtrap.org. Okay, let's get to the kickoff with our special guest, the author of Jump Off Creek, Molly Gloss. Molly is the author of several novels in addition to the Jump Off Creek, including The Dazzle of Day, Wildlife, The Hearts of Horses, and Falling from Horses, as well as the story collection Unforeseen. She writes both realistic fiction and science fiction, and her work has received, among other honors, a Penn West Fiction Prize, an Oregon Book Award, 2 Pacific Northwest Booksellers Awards, the James Tiptree Jr. Award, and the Whitting Writers Award. Woo! That's a lot. Molly is a 4th-generation Oregonian and comes to us tonight from her home in Portland. Please welcome Molly Gloss.
Thanks, Mike. That was great. A lovely introduction. And you will all notice that I even put earrings on for you today, which I do so seldom now that it's really sometimes hard to get those little loops through the holes anymore. Oh, I also put on mascara. That's right. For the first time, and I can't remember how long. I was kind of astonished when Fishtrap said they were choosing the Jump Off Creek for their reads, because this book has been out for almost 35 years. It often seems to me that everyone in the Northwest who ever wanted to read it would have already read it. And so it's kind of always a surprise, a shock when new readers contact me, and organizations still want to talk about this book that's been out so long. But I'm very happy about it, very happy about it. This book has never been out of print because of all those new readers. Okay, so one question I get quite a lot is whether Lydia's story is based on one of the women I dedicated the novel to, my 4 great-grandmothers. I called them Western women in my dedication. And I have to tell people, no, she's not based on any of my grandmothers because none of those 4 left diaries or letters, none that were saved anyway. What I know about each of those grandmothers, I can sum up in a sentence or 2. I know that Lena was a German bride. She crossed the country in a covered wagon. Emma's husband abandoned her and 6 children on the Wallowa Plains. Nancy gave birth to the first white child born in Arion County, Texas. At least that's the story. And Molly, she was the woman I was named for, was a farmer's wife whose twins, the last born of 12 children, she named Y and Z, just those letters, not Zebediah, just Z. And that pretty well covers everything I know about those great grandmothers of mine. I wish I knew more because it seems to me that each of their lives holds the promise of a story, but no, not Lydia's story. Even so, Lydia is based on letters, journals, diaries, memoirs of Western women, just not the women of my own family. So for the kickoff of Fishtrap Reads, I thought I'd tell you what I know about Western women, their real lives, what I learned when I was researching for the novel, kind of versus how Western women have usually been portrayed in fiction. I think it's a fairly safe bet that I've read more Westerns than most of you, maybe all of you. I started reading them when I was about 12. That's a library story I've told many times, and I won't tell it again tonight. But the bottom line is that I've read all the ones you've heard of: Zane Grey, Louis L'Amour, Jack Schaefer, Larry McMurtry, and many you probably haven't heard of: Wayne Overholser, Hal Borland, Elmer Kelton. They're all authors that I like quite a lot. I have a great deal of affection for those novels, even now, even the ones that traffic in stereotypes, plot elements that I know never occurred in the real history of the West, because even when they have a kernel of truth as a starting point, they're trying to be true to an American West that never existed. They were always about how America wanted to see itself. And I admit, I have a weakness for Shane and all the damaged, bruised, trying to redeem themselves heroes of the classic American story, which is probably why I was a bit slow, I'm embarrassed to admit, to realize how much of the women's story was missing from the Western novel. The fact is, stories have been told and retold about the cowboys, the mountain men, the cavalrymen, the sodbusters, the gold miners, the Texas Rangers. And of course, all those lives had been supported by women. They had to have been. And yet I've read any number of Westerns that had no women in them. And so when I had the notion to write a Western myself, I saw that those lost, ignored, unwritten women had left me with an opening. I could write the book nobody else was writing, the book I hadn't been able to find on the library shelves. So what I had in mind in the beginning was not far off from the formulary novels that we call Westerns, but a Western with a heroic woman at the center of the plot. There are a fairly small number of plots in formula Westerns: the cavalry plot, the lawman plot, the redemptive gunslinger plot, the heroic but flawed cowboy plot. It ought to be an easy thing, I thought, to put a woman into the homesteader plot. to put a woman on the land and give her a man's work, make her not the wife or sister or daughter of a homesteader, but the homesteader herself alone on the land. But in the first year that I was trying to write this novel, I struggled to figure out who Lydia Sanderson was. After 30 years of reading all across the spectrum of Western fiction, I actually had no model for the life of a woman homesteading. I had no idea what sort of 19th century woman might have chosen a homesteading life, or even if any single women had homesteaded. What I had learned about Western women from all those years of reading Westerns, I can describe to you in 3 or 4 images. The sod house wife whose isolation drives her gradually into insanity. The staunch wife loading the rifles for her husband as they crouch behind the wheel of the wagon or behind the wall of the cabin, fighting off Indians or outlaws or a gang run by a crooked sheriff. The helpless victim of, you choose, Indian captivity, attacking wolves, renegade gunmen. The stalwart ranch girl who helps the hero in a crisis and as a reward is given a good marriage. Or conversely, the girl left standing alone at the end of the story when her heroic but footloose cowboy lover rides into the sunset. If women had ever homesteaded, if independent women had gone west and thrived, I hadn't learned it from reading Western fiction. It occurred to me that I might be trying to imagine a woman who did not exist in the history of Western settlement, because those women were mostly missing from the histories of the West as well. To find those lost women, I had to sift through regional histories, you know, the kinds of things I mean, I think you must know. County Historical Society publications, pioneer sketches by old timers. And I was looking always for the scarce bits about women. In later years, there'd be oral histories of women in the West. Historians would widen their view to include women's experiences. Universities would publish the private writings of Western women. But this, when I was researching Jump Off Creek, this was in the mid-1980s, I'll remind you. And I had to scrounge around to find the diaries, journals, memoirs, letters that told the kinds of things I wanted to know. The details of daily life for women in the rural West in the 19th century. I found them, but it was work. It was in those diaries and memoirs that I found the stories of Indian women who were living on the land that newcomers stole from them, the Spanish-speaking Mexican women who came north with the missions as housekeepers and cooks, the white and black and Hispanic women who rushed to the goldfields with the men as prostitutes, as cooks, as miners themselves. The farm wives who grubbed out sagebrush, followed the plow, hauled wood and water while their husbands worked for wages away from their homestead claims. The ranch wives who branded cattle, pulled lambs, forked hay, cooked for the roundup crew. The Asians who came west, or actually east, as concubines or slaves. The communities of nuns who taught and nursed and preached. The young women breaking horses for their family or for their neighbors. And yes, the single women who followed the homesteading dream, alone or beside their siblings, their cousins, their parents. I imagine most of you in this audience know this. It was the Homestead Act of 1862 that allowed a homesteader to file a claim on a quarter section, 160 acres, and later it was 320 acres for a very small fee. But to gain title to the land, to prove up on it, a certain number of acres had to be broken to the plow and planted within the first 5 years, and a house had to be built and lived in for 5 years. You couldn't simply build a shack and then move to town and come out occasionally to look at your land. You had to live on it for 5 years. The Homestead Act had given women the right, along with men, to file a claim for a homestead, provided the woman was single or head of the household and over 21. I knew that even before I had the idea for my homesteading novel. Many of you probably know it too. What you may not know, what I didn't know until my summer of research for the Jump Off Creek, was that the percentages of women claiming homesteads climbed steadily with the years, and at its zenith in the 1910s, about 1 in 5 homestead claims was filed by a woman. In these diaries and memoirs, I found all the homesteading women I had seldom glimpsed in years of reading Western novels. Women who carried on the homestead or ran the ranch following the death of a husband, many spinsters or widows looking for financial independence, either by farming on their own or by proving up on a claim and then selling out for a grub stake to do something else. Women escaping from their marriages, either as divorcees or runaways. Women hoping to earn a living outside the usual women's fields. They didn't want to be a school teacher, a maid, a cook, a factory worker. Women sometimes pitched tents on their claim until they could get a house built. Many women came west with other family members, sisters or parents, brothers or cousins, and filed claims in a block to gain family holdings as large as possible. Because of the requirement that a house be built on each claim, sometimes family members or friends built their houses at or straddling the common property line. I read about 4 sisters who filed on adjoining homesteads and built their houses all in a cluster at the intersection of the 4 corners of their individual claims and worked together to plow and plant on all 4. Some women had already tried to homestead somewhere else or were second-generation homesteaders. Alice Pratt's memoir, Homesteader's Portfolio, was a very valuable resource for me when I was doing this research. She had spent her childhood on a homestead in the Black Hills, doing a lot of the work for the homestead because her father was working in town much of the time to keep up the family finances. Her first memoir before Homesteader's Portfolio had been about that experience. And of course, there were women drawn westward by the same mythos that drew men, women who simply went for the adventure, just like Huck Finn lighting out for the territories. Alice Pratt was among those too. I had a haunting fear that it would be tame, she said at one point. Some who came late to the game, like Lydia, bought a relinquishment, that is, a homestead someone else had given up on. And plenty of homesteads were relinquished. Here's something that doesn't get talked about enough. More homestead claims were filed in the 20 years after 1900 than in the 50 years before. Of course, these 20th century homesteaders were taking up land an earlier generation had turned their backs on. Dry land, high elevation, extremes of weather. The role that the railroads and the government played in persuading people to come west and take up farming on land that might have only 8 inches of rain a year, that's a talk for another time. Just to say, for a while, every 160-acre parcel or 320-acre parcel in the dryland west was occupied, had a house on it, and was individually farmed. But less than half of all homestead claims were ever proved up on. And among the 20th century homesteaders, only 1 in 5 ever made it to final proof. You can spot the collapsed shacks of failed homesteads from every county road in the dry West. But here's something else you may not know. Women's rate of success proving up on their claims was statistically better than men's. I've thought about that a lot, and I've come to think it must have taken a certain kind of woman to make the attempt in the first place. The 19th century woman who chose a homesteading life, whether it was stubbornness or determination or that yearning for adventure, but something that would have served anyone, man or woman, in sticking it out, or so it seems to me. For the homestead novel that I planned to write, I had put together some plot elements of a traditional Western. A marauding grizzly, a cattle roundup, some bad guys rustling cattle, a half-breed sidekick. So in my reading of the diaries and memoirs of women, I hoped that I would find the same things Western men wrote about: encounters with wild animals, with outlaws, finding a way across unmapped mountains, hunting cattle on horseback, and here or there I did. But in the memoirs of women who had homesteaded, and wives and daughters who had worked on horseback alongside their husbands and fathers, there were details that I'd never come across in Western fiction. The difficulties of washing long hair in a small basin and in the winter getting it to dry without freezing overnight to brittle sticks. The surprising freedom with which most women moved about the West without being afraid of Indians or outlaws. The many ways in which a woman in skirts might manage to ride astride a saddle, and how common it was. In their diaries, I found details of backbreaking hard work, branding cattle, yes, in heavy skirts, grubbing out sagebrush, helping with lambing in the black freezing middle of the night, and also a daily matter-of-fact kind of courage and coping, details of sickness and childcare and grief and loneliness and poverty. Many of them wrote poems to dead husbands or children who had died. They wrote about their anguish over a lost love or a child gone wrong or an elderly parent failing. Where there were references to bodily functions, sex and childbirth and birth control, they were almost always oblique. In a letter between sisters, advice, or maybe it was a joke, about tying a tight knot in the bottom of your long nightgown as birth control. Or a coy remark about feeling poorly, which I learned to recognize as a euphemism for pregnancy. There were references to husbands who drank too much or abused or abandoned their families, sick husbands who left the work to the wife. They left lots of things unsaid. After a woman's vague complaint about burning the bread, we might only days later learn the reason. A blizzard has drifted over the stovepipe. In a report of helping a husband to gather cattle on horseback in icy weather, there would inevitably be a lament about not keeping up, and only then maybe her little murmur about feeling poorly. I don't understand myself really how novels arise in the writer's mind, but I know that this alchemy requires always a reader's passion, that The Jump Off Creek was written out of my lifelong familiarity with and affection for and frustration with the many forms of Western literature, especially and originally with the traditional formula Western. And I know that Lydia took her true character and the novel its true shape from that lengthy period of research, digging through and reading the voices of Western women themselves. The Jump Off Creek was first published in September 1989. I've already done that math for you. That was more than 33 years ago. It's never been out of print. And early on, I was often told that I'd written a singular work, that mine was virtually the only modern novel of a woman's experience in the West. And that might even have been true in 1989. A revisionist women's Western, one reviewer called it. But it could have been otherwise. In the earliest drafts of my novel, when I was struggling to understand who this homesteading woman, Lydia Sanderson, was, I had tried putting her into one of the women's roles I was familiar with from the two-gun cowboy novels. An educated, genteel Easterner of delicate beauty, a gun-toting, short-haired Calamity Jane type, or in another version, a trouser-wearing, cigar-smoking, strong and silent, tough as nails cowgirl. It was my habit in those days to take the summers off from writing. This started when my son was little and my writing hours were governed by the school calendar, And I had gotten to like the summers for catching up reading, for tending my garden, and just for kind of clearing the deck so I could start fresh in the fall. That particular summer, I began searching for Lydia in earnest, reading the diaries, memoirs, journals, and letters of women in the West. I had heard more than once that the Western as a genre is outworn, defunct, dead. Every nuance of Western mythology, so they say, has been endlessly explored in print and film until the genre has nothing left to reveal. But if the mythology of the frontier, the male mythology of conflict and conquest, has been emptied of its meaning, the other half of the Western experience, the women's half, with its governing myth of wholeness, of accommodation, its stories of ordinary people whose daily working lives are tied to the land and the weather, stories of peaceable, authentic courage, and of strong women and men whose strengths are, for instance, responsibility to the community and nurturing and compassion. Those stories have only begun to be plumbed. And in the fall, nearly a year into writing the novel, I sat down and wrote in Lydia's own diary that first entry as she's heading up into the Blue Mountains to claim the relinquishment she has purchased, sight unseen. And as soon as I did that, she told me who she was in the absolute clearest way, her character growing organically out of the circumstances I placed her in. And I went back to the beginning, started again, and wrote what she told me to write. With every diary entry after that, she shook down the novel around her. I found when I put her in the middle of the story I'd intended to write, she skewed the book in unexpected ways. The traditional Western storyline of life-threatening conflict, of sharp black and white separation between hero and villain, and a romantic ending in which the heroine becomes a bride as a closure to adventure, wasn't how she experienced the West. Lydia, in the manner of those women whose diaries I'd been reading, was so unflinchingly honest. She viewed her world so clearly and unsentimentally. I was made to see it that way too. I found I couldn't possibly write a traditional Western novel with that honest woman standing there watching me, telling me I was getting it wrong. The book became instead a working out of the different ways men and women confronted the frontier, an exploration of women's experience of the West, an experience of finding home and community, of accommodation to the landscape, set alongside what we've traditionally seen in men's stories of the West, a male mythology of escalating conflict. The Jump Off Creek is no longer a singular novel alone in a sea of men's writing about the West. It's now just one in a renaissance of Western literature, a revival spurred by the women's stories. There are now novels about homesteaders, roadhouse cooks, postmistresses, rodeo trick riders, freight haulers, all the many women whose stories went untold for so very long, now steadily becoming visible in our histories of the West, and some even in the fiction, the novels of the West. After a long silence, their voices finally heard, their lives finally the subject of our storytelling. I'm here if you wanna, anybody wants to ask any questions or carry on the conversation for a little bit more.
Well, Molly, if that didn't inspire people to pick up a copy of the book, nothing would. This is exactly how we wanted to kick off Fishtrap Reads. To, we've been doing this since Fishtrap has been doing this since 2006, and rarely do we get access to the author. And here we are. You've been a Fishtrap friend since the beginning of Fishtrap. I don't know when the first time you came, 1990 or
I was here the second year.
1989, and that's just
and Jump Off had not yet come out when I was here.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
So I think that with each event that we have, we'll keep building questions. All of you folks at home, now you know you have access to the author. So next week, Molly will be here live at noon with a whole nother little talk. She's going to talk about the myth of the American cowboy. You can take it in live or watch the recording afterwards at fishtrap.org or on Fishtrap's YouTube channel. And if you're here in Wallowa County, you can come to Fishtrap that day at noon, bring your bag lunch, and we'll all watch it together and have a book discussion afterwards right here. We'll also have an event each Wednesday for the next 5 weeks, including 3 presentations from the National Historic Oregon Trail Interpretive Center. You won't want to miss it. That'll be especially great for talks and discussions with family and in classrooms. So I think for now, I think we'll just encourage people to pick up a copy. It's the historical research that Molly put into this just makes it even more of a rich experience. So I just want to say that's it for our Fishtrap Reads kickoff. We'll get to see Molly at least 2 more times over the next month. Let everybody know about this, learn more, and we'll see you next week at fishtrap.org. Thanks for being a part of it. Thanks, Molly.